The message buzzed through just as I was placing the final touches on the wedding menu with my mother. I should have felt excited, overjoyed even, but instead, a strange coldness swept over me as I glanced at my phone. I wasn't ready for this. No one could be. I had always known that the world had a way of throwing curveballs at you, but nothing prepared me for the cold, cruel message that now flickered on my screen. There, in plain text, were words that made my heart skip a beat. You'll never outshine me. I told you years ago that I'd always be first. Enjoy watching from the sidelines. It was from Ava, my best friend. The woman who had been my confidant, my closest ally, the one I had shared my dreams with for years. And now, she had turned into something else entirely. A thief, a destroyer of everything I had worked so hard to build. My wedding, my future, my love. Gone in a flash, taken without a second thought. For a moment, the words blurred. My mind couldn't quite comprehend the full weight of what I had just read. Everything felt out of focus, as though the entire world had suddenly shifted on its axis. But in that split second of dizziness, one thing was crystal clear. Ava had done it. She had stolen James, my fiancé. Not just him. She had taken everything. The venue, the date, the floral arrangements I had spent months choosing. It was supposed to be my wedding in 4 weeks, my day, my moment. Instead, it was now hers. I didn't react. Not outwardly. I simply let the words sink in one by one. The shock, the humiliation, the disbelief. But I didn't let it show on my face. I didn't allow my hands to tremble, my lips to quiver, or my chest to rise with anger. My mother sat across from me, her eyes scanning a catering menu, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding in my mind. She looked up, noticing the brief pause, the sudden stillness in my demeanor. Everything okay, sweetheart? I smiled, a practiced, flawless smile that I had perfected over the years. Absolutely. She didn't question me further. She turned her attention back to the menu, unconcerned. But I wasn't listening anymore. Inside, everything had just shattered. I could feel the pieces of my world slowly falling apart. I should have felt angry, devastated, humiliated. And I did, in a way. But in that moment, more than any of those emotions, I felt something else. Something far colder. A sense of eerie calm, of quiet clarity. Because while Ava thought she had won, while she believed she had stolen my life, my future, my happiness, what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I never lose. As I stared at the message again, my fingers hovered over the screen, poised to reply. But I didn't type anything just yet. Not a single word. Instead, I closed my eyes and took a slow, steadying breath. When I opened them again, I knew exactly what I had to do. A single word. Short, sharp, and to the point. Enjoy. I pressed send. Ava would have no idea what it meant now, not yet. But in 4 weeks, on her wedding day, she would understand exactly what I meant. She would realize the magnitude of the mistake she had made, and she would feel every ounce of the weight of her own greed and arrogance. I slipped my phone back into my bag and picked up the catering brochure once more. My mother continued discussing entree options, unaware that everything had changed. She had no idea that the world I had so carefully crafted was already slipping through my fingers. Ava had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn. I wouldn't need to steal anything back from her. All I had to do was wait. I simply had to let her own choices unravel, piece by piece. And when the time came, she would fall. Right into the trap I had been setting all along. Because revenge doesn't always require action. Sometimes, the best way to destroy someone is to let them destroy themselves. I've known Ava for as long as I can remember. Our childhoods were intertwined like the most fragile of threads. So delicate, yet so tight. We grew up in the same neighborhood, played in the same parks, and shared every major milestone of our lives. But beneath the surface of what appeared to be an unshakable bond, there was something I never truly saw until now. From the very beginning, Ava had a way of making everything feel like a competition. It wasn't the healthy kind of competition, the kind that pushes you to be your best, that drives you to improve. No, Ava's competition was different. Hers was the kind that thrived on making someone else lose so that she could feel superior. And I didn't notice it at first, because it was so subtle, so cleverly hidden behind that radiant smile of hers. As children, we both tried to outdo each other in school. I would bring home an A, and Ava would bring home an A+ just to make sure there was no doubt who was the smarter one. She'd never say it out loud, of course. She didn't need to. It was in the way she'd casually mention how much easier the test had been for her, how her grade was somehow just a little better than mine. She was the one who would always win the attention, who would always have the last word. And I let her. I let her have it all, thinking it was just her way of being ambitious. But then it started to shift. As we grew older, Ava's need to be the center of everything began to take a more distinct shape. It wasn't just about grades anymore, or who could get more praise for the smallest accomplishment. No, now it was about the bigger things, the things I had worked so hard for, the things that were supposed to be mine. I remember the day I first started noticing it. It was only a few months after I had gotten engaged to James. I was excited, nervous, but mostly I was over the moon. I had spent years building a life with him, a life I thought would be perfect in every way. And then Ava started showing an interest in my wedding plans. At first, it felt natural. She was my best friend, after all. Why wouldn't she want to help? But there was something off about the way she asked to come with me to the dress fittings. How she insisted on helping me pick out the venue, even though I had already made the decision months before. It wasn't the support of a best friend. It was the kind of interference that made me question whether she was more invested in my wedding than I was. The compliments, the overzealous comments, the way she kept talking about the details like she owned them. Something about it felt off. I should have seen the signs then, but I didn't. I was too caught up in the excitement of the wedding, in my own little bubble of happiness. And then there was James. At first, I thought it was just the stress of planning a wedding. He had been distant, canceling date nights, avoiding discussions about the wedding. But it wasn't just that. It was the way Ava would look at him. Those lingering glances that could have easily been brushed off as nothing if they weren't so intentional. I caught her once, just before a bridal shower, brushing her hand against his arm in a way that was far too casual, too comfortable. I didn't want to believe it, couldn't bring myself to think that someone who I considered a friend could go that far. So I brushed it off. But the cracks were starting to form. And then came the night he disappeared. No explanation, no argument, no breakup conversation, just silence. I texted him, called him, but nothing. The man I was supposed to marry, the man who had promised to spend the rest of his life with me, was gone. I had no answers. And just when I thought I couldn't feel more lost, I received her message. But before I go any further, I want to pause for a moment and hear from you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you truly believe in, whether it's your relationships, your dreams, or your self-worth, hit that like button because this story is just getting started. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. It wasn't until everything started to unravel that I truly understood what Ava had been doing all along. It wasn't one grand gesture, one big betrayal that would have been obvious to anyone. No, Ava was far too clever for that. She knew exactly how to manipulate the situation in ways that would go unnoticed by everyone. Even me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The way she had slowly infiltrated every part of my life, every aspect of my wedding. It had all been a calculated move, and I had been too blinded by the excitement of the future to see it. At first, I had thought she was just being supportive the way any best friend would be. She would drop by to see how the planning was going, ask how she could help, and offer suggestions that seemed innocent enough. But soon, her involvement became less about support and more about ownership. She didn't just want to help. She wanted to take over. And I let her. She offered to help pick the venue, as if it wasn't already set in stone. I remember feeling a small pang of discomfort when she pushed for the Magnolia Estate, the place I had booked months in advance. It was perfect, just the right balance of elegance and charm. But when Ava insisted on showing up to every planning meeting, sitting at my side as if it were her wedding, I didn't question it. I thought she was just excited for me. After all, what kind of friend would I be if I pushed her away? Then there were the dress fittings. I could never have anticipated how much Ava would insert herself into the process. I'd ask her opinion on one dress, and she'd talk about how she could see me in something else. A few times, I caught myself wondering if she was choosing the dress for me or for herself. And that one moment, when she ran her fingers over a gown I had picked and said, "This one would be perfect for you." It should have been the red flag I needed, but I dismissed it. After all, she was my best friend. She was just excited, right? But then there was James. I had noticed the way he started pulling away months before. It wasn't that obvious at first. He was just a little distant, a little distracted. But the longer it went on, the more I felt a growing unease in my chest. At first, I assumed it was just wedding stress. He was worried about the commitment, the pressure of it all. But it didn't take long for me to realize something was wrong. He stopped talking about our future. The excitement he had once shown faded into indifference. And Ava was always around, always smiling at him in that way that felt a little too warm, a little too familiar. I watched as she played her part effortlessly, as if everything were a game. She would laugh at the same jokes James made, subtly touching his arm when she thought I wasn't looking, always finding reasons to be close to him, to be in his space. She was so good at it, so subtle, that I didn't realize until it was too late that she was slowly turning him against me. When James began to cancel our date nights, I convinced myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. When he started avoiding discussions about the wedding, I told myself it was normal. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a slow fade, a slow withdrawal. It wasn't until he just vanished that the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. No explanation, no phone call, no closure. Just silence. He was gone. And that was when I understood. The signs had always been there. Ava had been working her way into every part of my life, every piece of the puzzle, and I had been too naive to see it. She wasn't just my best friend. She was my rival, playing the long game, waiting for the moment when she could take everything from me. I should have seen it all along. The way she'd always tried to one-up me. The way she'd never let me have anything for myself. And now, she had taken the most important thing in my life. The man I loved, the future I had built, and all of the dreams I had worked so hard for. She had stolen them without hesitation. But what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had been planning too. While they were busy celebrating their victory, thinking they had won, I had been quietly laying the groundwork for something far more powerful than any of their petty games. Ava had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. I had always been the quiet one, the one who kept everything to myself. But what she didn't realize was that I never lose. I may have been hurt. I may have been devastated. But I wasn't broken. I had never been stronger. And I knew exactly what I was going to do next. For days I said nothing. Not to Ava, not to James, not even to my family. I walked around with a calm that was almost unnerving. A stillness that hung in the air around me like a cloud that wouldn't break. Inside, my world was collapsing. But I couldn't let them see it. Not Ava, certainly not James, and not my mother, who was still obliviously planning the wedding with the same joy she had before all of this started. I took a breath and forced myself to keep going. Because I knew something that neither of them did. I had the power. They may have taken everything from me. My fiancé, my wedding, my future. But I wasn't the one who was truly losing. No, I had already won. They just hadn't figured it out yet. It was as if a switch had flipped inside me. Every moment leading up to this had been a slow burn, each one more painful than the last. But now it was all clicking into place. Ava thought she had outsmarted me. She thought she had taken everything I cared about and left me with nothing. But in reality, she had handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy her without lifting a finger. I didn't need to rush in, angry and desperate. I didn't need to yell or cry or fight. I didn't need to confront Ava, to demand explanations or apologies. No, the most powerful thing I could do right now was sit back, remain calm, and let her watch her world unravel on its own. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending that everything was fine. Pretending that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't dying inside. But I was good at it. I had always been good at keeping my emotions hidden, at putting on a mask that no one could see through. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Ava especially needed to think she had one. She needed to believe that she had destroyed me, because the moment she thought that was when she would make her next mistake. As the days passed, I watched them both carefully. I saw the way Ava would drop by my house, her overly enthusiastic smile masking her gloating. I heard the whispers between my friends, the hushed conversations where they asked what had happened, where they speculated on the breakup, where they chose sides. But no one knew the truth, not yet. They didn't know the plan I had already set in motion. They didn't know what was coming for Ava, what was coming for James. The real key was my silence. By doing nothing, by offering no resistance, I was letting them destroy themselves. Ava thought she had taken my place, thought she had won James's love, thought she had stolen my wedding and everything that came with it. But she had made one huge mistake. She hadn't changed the guest list. She hadn't thought ahead, hadn't considered the one detail that would make this all unravel. She had no idea how badly she had underestimated me. I let her bask in her so-called victory for a while, let her think she was in control, that everything was falling into place just as she had planned. I smiled at her when I saw her at a friend's gathering, knowing she was too smug to see the truth. I listened to her gloat about her perfect wedding day, not once letting on that I knew what she had done, what she was about to lose. And when the invitation arrived, an ornate, golden envelope with her name emblazoned across it, I had to smile to myself. It wasn't a victory for her. It was the beginning of her downfall. I opened the envelope slowly, savoring the moment. The thick, luxurious paper felt cool between my fingers as I pulled out the invitation to her wedding. It was everything I had once dreamed of. My wedding, my venue, my date. Only now it was her name on the card, not mine. She had taken everything, hadn't she? But what she didn't know, what she hadn't realized, was that she had made the most foolish of mistakes. She had assumed she was in control, that she had all the power. But now the game was mine. I slipped the invitation back into the envelope, took a deep breath, and smiled to myself. I didn't need to steal anything from Ava. She had already stolen everything she could. And now I was going to let her watch as it all crumbled down. I had everything I needed. All I had to do was show up. And when I did, she would understand exactly what I meant by enjoy. The invitation arrived on a bright, sunny afternoon, the kind of day that felt almost too perfect to be real. When I saw the envelope, my heart skipped a beat. Not because I was excited, but because I knew exactly what it meant. It was thick, gold-embossed, and unmistakably formal. The type of invitation that you'd expect for an event that was supposed to be the most important day of someone's life. I had expected it, of course. Ava, ever the perfectionist, would never leave anything to chance. She needed to ensure that I knew she had taken everything from me. So, with the same sense of ownership she had applied to every detail of my wedding, she sent me the invitation to her big day. I opened it slowly, as if savoring the moment. The paper felt cold against my fingertips, the elegance of it mocking me in the most subtle of ways. And there it was, the Magnolia Estate, the venue I had painstakingly booked months ago, the same place where I had imagined walking down the aisle, the place where I thought I'd be making memories with the man I loved. But instead, it was Ava's name now on the card, with James's beside it, not mine. The words blurred for a moment as a bitter taste filled my mouth, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me being angry. This was about me being in control. I studied the invitation again, my eyes tracing every word. They were getting married on the same date we had chosen, in the same venue I had painstakingly decorated in my mind. Ava had taken it all except for one crucial detail. She hadn't changed the guest list. A slow smile crept across my face as I leaned back in my chair. She had made a grave mistake. Ava thought she was holding the winning hand, that she had everything in her grasp. What she didn't realize was that the moment she sent this invitation to me, she sealed her own fate. Because, you see, I wasn't the one who needed to steal anything back. Ava had already done the work for me. She had stolen my wedding, my fiancé, and my future. But she had also made sure that everyone who mattered to me was still going to be there. My family, my childhood friends, even James's parents, who had always adored me. None of them had been replaced. Ava had forgotten the most important rule of any good plan. When you steal from someone else, you don't always get to control what they do with what's left. I tucked the invitation back into its envelope and set it down carefully. The entire situation felt almost absurd. Ava had thought she was making a statement, that by taking everything I had worked for, she would prove that she had won. But what she didn't know was that her victory was only temporary. The truth was, I wasn't interested in playing her game. I wasn't going to fight back in the way she expected. Instead, I would do something far more satisfying. I would let her have everything she thought she had taken. I would let her revel in the illusion of victory. Let her wear the dress, walk down the aisle, and say her vows. Because in the end, she would realize that she had nothing. Not even the people who were supposed to be there for her. As I placed the invitation aside, I thought of the guest list. Ava had never bothered to change it, and that was her biggest mistake. Every person who had been invited to my wedding would now be showing up for her. My friends, my family, James's parents, every single one of them would be there, but they wouldn't be there for Ava. They wouldn't be there to celebrate her. They would be there to see her fall. It was almost poetic, really. She thought she had won, but in the end, the only thing she had stolen from me was my chance to have a wedding. She hadn't stolen my people, my legacy, or my dignity. No, those things had been rightfully mine from the beginning. I smiled to myself, imagining the look on her face when she realized what was about to happen. The moment she stood at the altar, surrounded by her guests, and realized that every single one of them was secretly rooting for the woman she had tried to destroy. But I wasn't done yet. There was more to come. This was only the beginning of the plan. And in just a few weeks, Ava would learn the hard way that revenge doesn't always require action. Sometimes, the most effective strategy is to let someone else's mistakes unravel them from the inside out. I leaned back, my mind already racing ahead. In a few short weeks, everything would come together. Ava would have no idea what hit her. The days passed in a slow, almost suffocating march toward the wedding. Each one felt like a delicate thread being woven into a tapestry of tension, the fabric tightening with every passing moment. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Ava was walking around like the queen of the world, glowing with the false certainty that she had everything in her grasp. I saw her posting pictures of herself with James, her smile radiant, her every move seemingly flawless. But beneath the surface, I knew better. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicking. I was simply waiting for the moment when her perfect illusion would crack, when her carefully constructed world would come crumbling down. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. She was doing all the work for me. She thought she had orchestrated the perfect wedding, taken my fiancé, stolen my dreams. But what she hadn't realized was that every step she took was leading her straight to her downfall. I kept my distance, pretending that I had let go, pretending that it didn't matter to me. Every time I saw her smug smile, every time she mentioned the wedding with that spark of pride in her eyes, I let it wash over me like water. I didn't react. I didn't show the slightest flicker of emotion. I wanted her to think she was winning, to believe that she had finally done what she had always wanted, become the center of attention, the one everyone admired, the one who had taken what was mine. But I knew better. Behind the scenes, I was busy, not planning or scheming, but quietly observing. The guest list had been set in stone the moment Ava had decided to steal everything. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't changed a single name. Every single person who had been invited to my wedding was still invited to hers. The difference? They weren't there for her. They weren't there to celebrate her and James. No, they were there to watch her fall, to witness the consequences of her arrogance. I thought about the way things used to be, how simple everything had felt before all of this. The excitement of planning a wedding with someone you loved, the anticipation of starting a new chapter of your life. But that feeling, that joy, had been taken away from me. And in its place, I had built something else. A sense of calm, a sense of power that I had never known before. I let the days tick by slowly, savoring each one, knowing that the moment of reckoning was fast approaching. Each day was another reminder of how little control Ava actually had. She had thought she could take my life, my future, my happiness. But what she didn't understand was that she could never take my peace. And she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. As the wedding day drew closer, I kept my thoughts focused on the endgame. Everything was lining up perfectly. The venue, the date, the guests, all of them were mine. I didn't have to do anything dramatic, anything loud. All I had to do was show up. And when I did, Ava would finally realize that she had been playing a game she didn't understand. A game she would lose. I had spent so much time pretending, so much time wearing the mask of indifference, that by now, everyone believed I was over it. But the truth was, I wasn't over it. I was just waiting. I was waiting for the moment when the pieces would finally fall into place, and everything she thought she had would slip through her fingers like sand. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't devastated. I was calm. I was focused. And I was ready. The quiet before the storm was almost unbearable. The calm was a constant reminder of the chaos that was about to erupt. I could feel it in the air, thick with the tension of what was to come. And as much as Ava believed she had everything under control, I knew she had no idea what was about to happen. She thought the storm had already passed. But in reality, it was just beginning. The morning of the wedding arrived, and with it, a sharp sense of clarity. The air was crisp, the sun shining with that golden glow that made everything feel like it was straight out of a dream. But this wasn't a dream, it was a moment of reckoning. I had been waiting for this day for weeks, watching it slowly approach like a clock ticking toward midnight. And now, as I stood just outside the gates of the Magnolia estate, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Ava, with her perfect smile, her perfect dress, her perfect life. She had no idea what was about to unfold. She thought this day belonged to her, that she was the star of the show. But she was wrong. This was my day. It always had been. And now it was time for her to face the truth. I arrived early, just as the first guests began trickling into the estate. The sprawling grounds, the lush greenery, the stunning floral arch. All of it was exactly as I had imagined it. Every detail had been mine, chosen with care, with love, with anticipation for a day that would never come. But as I stood there, watching the guests gather, I realized that none of it had truly been taken from me. Ava might have stolen the date, the venue, and the man I loved, but she could never take the essence of what I had built. The first few guests arrived, and I couldn't help but notice the hesitation in their steps. There was a slight pause, a glance exchanged, before they made their way toward the check-in table. The looks they gave each other, the murmurs that began to ripple through the crowd. It was all so obvious. "Isn't this supposed to be her wedding?" one guest whispered. The question hung in the air like a cloud, and I couldn't help but smile to myself. They were starting to realize. One by one, the realization spread through the crowd. The program they were holding, the names printed in gold, Ava's name, James's name. Yet the venue, the decorations, the date, they were all mine. My wedding, my plans, my life had been stolen by Ava. But what she didn't know was that she had only taken the surface. The foundation of it all, the love, the history, the connections, those were still mine. I saw Daniel's parents arrive next. His mother, Linda, had always been fond of me. From the very first time I met her, she had taken me under her wing, telling me that I was the kind of woman her son needed. Grounded, intelligent, strong. She had always made me feel like part of the family, and I could see the shift in her expression the moment she stepped out of the car and saw me standing there, calm and composed. "Sweetheart," she said, taking my hands in hers. "What are you doing here?" I tilted my head slightly, offering a small, knowing smile. "I was invited." Her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she looked toward the check-in table, her gaze sharpening. "Where is my son?" she asked, her voice carrying through the courtyard. Silence fell over the guests. It had begun. The first cracks in Ava's perfect world were starting to show. The whispers spread like wildfire, and I could see the confusion, the discomfort, mounting in the air. Daniel's parents, my family, my friends. They were all here, but they weren't here for Ava. They were here for the woman they had always supported. They were here for me. Inside the bridal suite, Ava was oblivious. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, champagne flutes in hand, laughing and chatting, basking in the glow of her stolen victory. But I could see it in her eyes. A subtle unease that she was trying so hard to cover. She was trying to hold on to that illusion, but the cracks were already starting to show. Her phone buzzed on the vanity table, and I could almost hear the silence that followed as she read the messages. She glanced up, her expression faltering. "Hannah," she muttered under her breath, reading something on her phone. Then another message popped up. "Did you know that 90% of your guests are her family and friends?" Ava's fingers tightened around her phone, her knuckles going white as the realization hit her. She tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it, but it was no use. Her perfect wedding, the one she had stolen, was falling apart, and she couldn't do anything to stop it. Outside, Daniel's best man, Matt, was with him, trying to calm him down, but I could see the tension in Daniel's posture as he paced nervously near the altar. His usual confidence had all but evaporated. The words Matt whispered to him carried through the air, though I couldn't hear them clearly. But it didn't matter. I knew exactly what Matt was saying. "This isn't a wedding," Matt had said. "It's an execution." Daniel stopped pacing, his face pale. He had been so sure of his decision, so sure that this was the right thing to do. But now he was starting to see the truth. The guests weren't celebrating. They were waiting. They weren't here for Ava. They were here to witness her downfall. I watched as Daniel scanned the guest list, the color draining from his face as he saw the names. He finally understood. The faces that were supposed to be celebrating their union were the faces of my people. Family, friends, colleagues, everyone who had supported me. And Daniel knew, in that moment, that he wasn't the man everyone had come to see. He wasn't the man they were rooting for. Ava had made a mistake, and he had been too blind to see it. I could feel the tension rising, the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ava was about to realize that she had not only stolen my wedding, but she had also stolen my audience. The moment she stepped into the spotlight, she would realize that she wasn't the star of this show. She was just another actor in my story. As I watched from the back of the room, calm and composed, I knew that the first cracks had appeared. Ava had thought she was walking down the aisle to a life of victory, but she had no idea that the real storm was just beginning. Ava's world was starting to collapse around her, but she still didn't see it. The cracks that had begun to form earlier were now spreading wide open, and she was doing everything in her power to hold them together, pretending everything was fine, pretending this was her perfect day. But the whispers were getting louder, the awkward glances more frequent, and the unease spreading through the crowd like a virus. Inside the bridal suite, Ava was a flurry of nerves. She could feel the tension in the air, but she was trying so hard to push it down, to keep up the illusion that this was exactly how it was meant to be. Her bridesmaids, once eager to support her, were now starting to shift uncomfortably, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't dare speak it aloud. The champagne flutes were raised, but even the bubbly couldn't drown out the sense of impending disaster that hung thick in the air. I watched her through the window as she paced back and forth, her eyes darting around the room, looking for reassurance, for someone to tell her everything would be okay. But no one could. The foundation had already cracked, and there was no fixing it now. I could almost feel her desperation from where I stood. She was starting to see what I had already known all along. This day wasn't going to go as she planned. Not by a long shot. Her phone buzzed again. I could see her eyes widen as she read the text, the color draining from her face. She whispered something under her breath, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what the message said. Daniel's parents just left. I could feel the air in the room shift, the last bit of her composure slipping away. She couldn't deny it any longer. Her perfect day was falling apart, and no one was there to hold her up. Meanwhile, outside, Daniel was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, looking more lost than I had ever seen him. He had thought this was going to be a celebration, a day of love and joy, but instead, he was standing at the edge of a precipice, his feet unsure, his mind racing. His best man, Matt, tried to pull him back, But Daniel was lost in the realization that everything had been a lie. "You didn't look at the guest list, did you?" Matt said, his voice a quiet whisper, but it carried through the tension that had taken over the courtyard. Daniel shook his head, but there was no denying the truth now. The people who were supposed to be celebrating his wedding were not there for him. They weren't there for Ava. They were there for me. Daniel's face went pale as he scanned the list. The names that were supposed to represent his new life, his new beginning, but instead, they were the names of my family, my friends, my colleagues. He had been a pawn in Ava's game, and now he was finally realizing it. This was not the wedding he had imagined. This was a performance, and Ava had orchestrated it, but the audience was rooting for someone else. I could feel the tension in the air as the realization spread through the estate like wildfire. The whispers were getting louder, the discomfort more palpable. The first few guests had already begun to leave, slipping away quietly, too uncomfortable to stay in a room where the bride's true supporters were so clearly not in her corner. And as the guests trickled out, it became clear to Ava. This was no longer her wedding. This was mine. She had taken my venue, my date, my fiancé, but she had never taken the people who truly cared about me. I could see it in her eyes as she scanned the room, desperately searching for someone to back her up, someone to tell her this was still her moment. But the room was emptying out. One by one, the people who had once been her allies were slipping away, not out of malice, but out of a deep, undeniable discomfort. The truth had finally reached them, and there was no denying it any longer. Ava stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words to fix this, to salvage what was left. But there was nothing she could say. The damage had been done. And as she stood there, her eyes darting around the room, I could almost feel her panic building, rising in her chest like a tidal wave. She had thought she was in control. She had thought she had won. But in reality, the game was over. Outside, I saw Daniel walking slowly toward the check-in table, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of confusion and regret. His mother, who had been so supportive of me, stood by the doors, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She had never liked Ava, but now, she couldn't even pretend anymore. She turned to Daniel, her voice sharp but soft. "Where is she?" she asked, her eyes scanning the empty space where Ava had once stood. Daniel shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, but I think it's over." It was over, and Ava had no idea how deep the hole she had dug for herself truly was. She had thought this was her day, her victory, but in reality, she had walked straight into a trap of her own making. The more she tried to salvage it, the more she exposed her desperation. And then, I saw it, the moment her carefully crafted delusion crumbled completely. Ava dropped her bouquet, the delicate flowers tumbling to the ground as if the weight of the truth had finally hit her. She stormed through the estate, her heels clicking against the polished floors, each step echoing the growing panic in her chest. She was going to find Daniel, try to salvage what was left. But it was too late. The damage was done. I watched it all unfold in front of me, the destruction of her fantasy, the unraveling of her perfect wedding. And as I stood there, calm and composed, I realized one thing. Ava had never understood the game she was playing. She had never understood that the best way to win wasn't by stealing from others. It was by making sure you never lost yourself in the process. And Ava, she had lost. All of it. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Outside, the guests had mostly scattered, retreating into the shadows of the estate, murmuring amongst themselves, uncertain of what to do. Inside, Ava was still trying to hold on to whatever shred of control she thought she had left, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. I could feel the tension in the air, the inevitable truth closing in on her like a noose tightening around her neck. And then it happened. I saw Daniel storming down the hallway, his eyes frantic, his steps hurried. There was no more confident swagger in his walk, no more belief that he was the man who had everything in his grasp. Now he was just a shell of the person I once knew, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with confusion. I could see it all in his expression. The shock, the realization, the doubt. He had been living in a fog, in denial, thinking that this day would be the beginning of something beautiful. But instead, it was the unraveling of everything he thought he knew. He barged into the bridal suite without knocking, his eyes locking onto Ava immediately. The look on his face was one of quiet fury, the kind of anger that comes not from being told a lie, but from realizing that you've been living one for so long. Ava froze, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find words, but nothing came out. She couldn't mask the panic in her eyes, and it only made Daniel's expression harder, more resolute. "What the hell is going on, Ava?" he demanded, his voice harsh, but quiet. It was the kind of question that didn't need an answer, it was already obvious. Ava had made her choice, and now Daniel was beginning to see the destruction in the wake of that choice. Ava took a step back, clutching her dress as if she could somehow hold the pieces of her world together by sheer force of will. "What do you mean? James, we've been planning this. This is our day," she said, trying to force calmness into her voice, but it was shaky, strained. Daniel's jaw clenched as he stepped closer. His eyes flickered over to the door, to the guests who had been slowly leaving, to the empty spaces where familiar faces used to be. He saw the truth before Ava could even say another word. He looked back at her, a look of disbelief clouding his expression. "You didn't change the guest list, did you?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, but the weight of it was enough to shatter her last bit of composure. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had been so caught up in stealing everything from me, so obsessed with having the perfect wedding, that she had overlooked the one detail that would ultimately undo her. She hadn't changed the guest list. She hadn't taken the time to realize that every single person there was there for the woman she had betrayed. "Those are her people," Daniel said, the realization dawning on him. "Those are her friends, her family, her colleagues, and I—" He stopped himself, his words faltering as the weight of it hit him. Ava's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw the mask crack. She was no longer the woman who had seemed so sure of herself, so convinced that she had one. She was now the woman who was desperately clinging to a life that wasn't hers to begin with. "This isn't what I wanted," Daniel muttered, more to himself than to Ava, as if the truth was something he had been too afraid to face for so long. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "What do you mean? This is our day." Ava's voice shook as she reached for him, her hand trembling in the air. "James, please, please don't do this. We can fix this, we can." But Daniel stepped back, shaking his head. The space between them seemed to grow, both physically and emotionally. He no longer saw the woman he had once loved. Now, all he saw was the woman who had orchestrated a lie so grand, it had cost him everything. "I need a minute," he said, his voice low, defeated. Ava stared at him, her face twisting in disbelief as she watched him walk away, unable to hold him back. In that moment, the woman who had spent years plotting her triumph over me finally realized what she had lost. Not just James, but her entire sense of control, her carefully built illusion. And then it hit me, the irony of it all. Ava had spent so long trying to outshine me, trying to take my place, thinking that by stealing everything I had worked for, she would emerge victorious. But the truth was, she had never understood the one thing I knew from the beginning. Revenge doesn't come from taking what belongs to someone else. It comes from letting them destroy themselves. As Daniel walked away, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and empty, I could feel the weight of it lift from my chest. The storm had passed. Ava's delusion was gone, and there was no fixing it now. I hadn't needed to say a word. I hadn't needed to fight. I just had to wait for her to unravel on her own. And now, she was watching as everything she had built came crashing down. The moment the first guest stood up and quietly left, it was as if the rest of the house had held its breath and then exhaled in unison. Ava stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion, her mind desperately trying to grasp the enormity of what was unfolding around her. She had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots, but now she was nothing more than a spectator in her own wedding, watching helplessly as it crumbled before her. One by one, Guests who had come to support her began to filter out, their steps slow, their faces drawn with discomfort, their eyes betraying the truth they had been trying so hard to ignore. It wasn't just the awkwardness that made them leave. It was the palpable sense of wrongness in the air. This wasn't a wedding. It was a charade, and they had been duped into attending. I saw it all unfold from the back of the room, leaning against the stone wall near the entrance. I watched as Daniel's mother, her face a picture of disbelief, finally turned to her husband, her words sharp and clear. "We should go. There's no wedding happening here today." Her voice carried through the courtyard, and as if on cue, several other guests began to rise from their seats, exchanging uncomfortable glances before making their way toward the exits. There was no stopping it now. Ava had thought she was walking down the aisle to an audience that was waiting to celebrate her stolen victory, but instead, she was facing the cold reality that everyone she had hoped to impress was silently rejecting her. The whispers grew louder, like an unstoppable tide washing over the estate. Ava's bridesmaids, who had once looked so eager to be part of her day, now stood awkwardly by her side, unsure of what to do, unsure of who to support. They exchanged a few looks, hesitant to make a move. The champagne that had once been flowing freely was now abandoned, half-drunk glasses forgotten as the reality set in. They were all complicit in a lie. I saw Ava's face twist with frustration, her hand gripping the bouquet so tightly I thought the stems might snap. Her knuckles were white, the tension in her body evident in every rigid movement. She turned to the nearest bridesmaid, her voice low, frantic. "Why are they leaving? Why aren't they celebrating?" But no one could answer her. Not with words. The answer was written in every step, in every quiet exit. Ava had been so fixated on taking everything from me, on proving she could be the one to take the spotlight, that she never stopped to think about the consequences. She never stopped to think about what it would mean for her when the people around her realized that everything she had built was a house of cards, just waiting to fall. Then came the final blow. Daniel appeared at the back of the room, his face pale, his eyes full of regret and confusion. He looked lost, like a man who had woken up to a nightmare and couldn't find his way out. The guests, who had already started to trickle out, all turned to him, their eyes full of questions, but none of them said a word. They didn't need to. He saw it all now. The empty chairs, the hushed voices, the absence of celebration. And in that moment, the full weight of what he had done settled over him. Ava tried to approach him, her steps quick but unsteady, her voice shaking as she called his name, but Daniel didn't turn toward her. He just stood there, his body rigid, his mind no longer clouded by the illusion she had carefully woven around him. "You need to fix this," she said, her voice low, frantic. She reached for his arm, but he pulled away, the distance between them growing wider with every second. "Ava," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't fix this. Not anymore." Her eyes flickered with disbelief, her lips parting as if to say something, but the words never came. Her entire world, the one she had worked so hard to build, was crumbling. She had orchestrated a show for him, for everyone, but she hadn't realized that in trying to make me disappear, she had erased herself in the process. Ava looked around, as if hoping for some kind of support, but there was none. The truth was too loud now, too undeniable. Daniel, the man she had stolen, was no longer hers. He had never been, really, and now he was walking away, no longer the man she had built her life around, but a man who was finally seeing the truth of who she was. Daniel's eyes met mine across the room. There was no anger, no regret in his gaze, only a deep sadness and a quiet understanding. He nodded ever so slightly, as if to say, "I see it now. I understand." He turned and left without a word, followed closely by his parents and the remaining guests who still had enough integrity to walk away from the wreckage that was unfolding. Ava stood alone, surrounded by the debris of her own making. Her face twisted in fury, but the tears she tried to hold back were starting to spill over, marking her as the woman who had finally lost. All her plans, all her efforts to steal everything I had, to take what was mine, had come to nothing. The people who mattered had seen through her, and the ones she had tried to impress were now gone, leaving her with nothing but the remnants of her broken dreams. I stood at the back of the room, watching as the last of the guests slipped away. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to confront Ava to add more salt to the wound. The truth was already out there, and it was enough. As the final few left, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the destruction of Ava's wedding, not the chaos, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had done this to herself. All I had to do was wait. And now, Ava's perfect day had turned into her worst nightmare. Ava stood in the center of the grand estate, the weight of the day finally crashing down on her. The flowers that had once looked so perfect, the soft music that had filled the air, the guests who had all been so eager to see her marry the man she had stolen. All of it was fading into nothingness. Her dream wedding had turned into a nightmare, and there was no escaping it now. I watched her from a distance, standing just inside the door, my arms crossed as I took in the scene. She was frozen, her eyes darting between the empty chairs and the few lingering faces, searching desperately for any sign that things could still be salvaged. But there was no salvation, no last-minute rescue. Her hand still clutched the bouquet, the delicate flowers wilting as they were crushed beneath her grip. The perfect picture of the woman who had everything was now a woman standing alone in a room full of shattered expectations. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. Ava's eyes were wild, her breath uneven as she took a step toward the altar, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Every step seemed to echo in the silence, like the ticking of a clock counting down to the inevitable. She was so close to the edge, so close to finally facing the consequences of what she had done. She caught sight of Daniel's empty chair, his absence more deafening than anything else in the room. A cold breath escaped her lips, and for a brief moment, I thought she might break. But she didn't. Instead, she straightened her back, wiping away the stray tears that had begun to fall. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, defiance, maybe, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. But it was too late for that. Ava turned, her face twisting as she locked eyes with me across the room. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. I could see the fury building behind her eyes, the desire to lash out, to demand an explanation, to accuse me of having ruined her day. But in that moment, she knew. She knew that nothing I could say would change the truth she had spent so long trying to bury. Her perfect wedding, her perfect revenge, was nothing but an illusion. And I hadn't had to lift a finger. She had done it to herself. I don't understand. Ava's voice broke the silence, a tremor in her words. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. How could you just stand there and watch this happen? Why didn't you fight for what was yours? I met her gaze, my expression calm. Because I never needed to fight, I said, my voice steady and cold. You fought against me, Ava. You thought you could take everything from me. But you never understood that what you were really stealing was never mine to give away. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw her falter. I saw the cracks in the carefully constructed facade that had held her together for so long. She had believed her own lies, convinced herself that by taking what was mine, she would be the one to win. But now, as she stood there, with no one left to support her, she realized how foolish she had been. Ava looked down at the bouquet in her hands, her fingers trembling as they loosened their grip, allowing the flowers to fall to the floor. It was a simple gesture, but it was one that spoke volumes. The weight of her actions, the weight of her betrayal had finally caught up with her. And as I watched her, standing in the wreckage of everything she had worked so hard to destroy, I felt nothing but peace. It wasn't satisfaction, not in the way most people would expect. It was a quiet, resolute sense of calm. Ava had done all the work for me. She had built her own trap and walked right into it. I didn't need to say another word. I turned away and walked toward the exit, leaving Ava to face the reality of what she had done. The guests who had remained, the ones who hadn't been able to leave in good conscience, watched me as I passed by. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt free. Ava had wanted everything. My man, my wedding, my life. And in the end, she had lost it all. Not because of anything I had done, but because she had overestimated her ability to control everything around her. She had wanted to outshine me. She had wanted to be the star of the show. But what she didn't understand was that no one could ever steal what was truly mine, because in the end, I was the one who chose what mattered. And as I walked away from the Magnolia estate, I knew one thing for sure. Ava had finally learned that some things can't be taken, no matter how hard you try. And me? I had walked away with everything that mattered. My peace, my dignity, and a future that was all my own. A year has passed since that day at the Magnolia estate, and life has moved on in ways I never expected. I've learned that time doesn't just heal wounds. It teaches you how to live without them, how to move forward, even when everything you thought you knew has been turned upside down. Ava's name has disappeared from my life as if it had never been there at all. The friends, the connections, the circles we once shared, none of them are the same. It's as if she's been erased from the very fabric of my existence, like a ghost that once haunted every corner of my world but has now vanished into thin air. She tried to make a comeback, of course. After the wedding that never happened, Ava attempted to rewrite the narrative. She told anyone who would listen that Daniel had cold feet, that the pressure of the wedding had been too much for him. But even the most desperate of lies can only hold up for so long. People saw through her. They saw the truth of what had happened, and it wasn't long before the whispers spread. At first, she tried to hold on to her social circles, to salvage what little reputation she had left. She tried dating again, picking up the pieces of a life that no longer had the foundation it once had. She even found herself a wealthy older man, someone who seemed like the perfect opportunity to secure the future she had once thought was hers for the taking. But it didn't last. Couldn't. Because Ava wasn't truly capable of finding something real. She was too busy chasing shadows, too busy trying to outdo everyone around her, to realize that the only thing she had been chasing was a fantasy. I heard from mutual friends that she had tried to rebuild her life. She threw herself into this new relationship with all the fervor of someone who thought they could outrun their past. But no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much money or luxury she clung to, it wasn't enough. Because what she never understood, what she still refuses to admit, is that you can't buy love. You can't manipulate your way into someone's heart. You can't steal something that isn't meant for you, no matter how hard you try. And yet, she kept trying, kept spinning her web of lies, kept trying to convince the world that she was the victim. But there were too many people who knew better. Too many people who had witnessed the unraveling, who had seen her true nature in the moments when she thought no one was looking. The more she tried to force her way back into the spotlight, the more people pulled away. Eventually, she found herself alone, completely isolated, her reputation in ruins, with no one left to lean on but herself. The one thing she had wanted more than anything else, the one thing she had stolen from me, had slipped through her fingers. It was the one thing she would never understand. You can't take love, you can't take dignity, you can't take peace. Those things are given, and Ava never learned how to earn them. As for me, my life has taken a turn I never expected, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. I didn't need to fight for my peace, didn't need to fight for my future. I simply had to let go of what wasn't meant for me. The man I thought I would spend my life with, he was never the one for me, and I'm thankful now that I was able to see that before it was too late. I found happiness in places I never expected, in ways I never imagined. I've discovered a strength I didn't know I had, a resilience that was always there, waiting for the right moment to surface. And every day, as I wake up with the peace I've fought for, as I move forward into a life that is entirely my own, I can't help but think of Ava. She's gone from my life, a shadow of the person she once was. Her attempts to rewrite history, to reclaim what she thought was rightfully hers, have fallen apart. And as much as I know that she'll never fully understand the damage she caused, I'm not angry anymore. There's no need to be. The only thing I've lost in all of this is the time I spent worrying about someone who never deserved that space in my life. I've walked away from everything that was broken and learned to appreciate what truly matters. My family, my friends, the people who've always supported me through thick and thin, those are the ones who have remained by my side. The ones who knew my worth, who knew the truth. I've let go of the resentment, the anger, the bitterness. Ava may have tried to take everything from me, but in the end, she never realized that what mattered most couldn't be stolen. As I sit here today, free from the weight of the past, I know one thing for sure. I've won. Not because I've ruined her life, but because I've built a life that's mine, and mine alone. Ava thought she could take what was meant for me, but what she didn't understand is that some things can't be taken. Not by her, not by anyone. And that's a victory I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. As the story comes to a close, I can't help but reflect on the lessons I've learned throughout this journey. Life doesn't always go the way we expect, but if we stay persistent and believe in ourselves, everything eventually falls into place. If you found this story inspiring, or if you're looking for more stories full of strength and empowerment, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on a new story. We're here to share more than just entertainment. We want to inspire you and help you find strength in your own life. Hit the like button and share this video if you think it could help someone else. And feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and we can't wait to see you again in the next video.